I'm Brice. I'm head of AI products and platforms at Moderna. I'm also in charge of AI innovation and transformation, which goes with it. My role is to promote every way to augment our people so that we can make the greatest possible impact with our medicines.
I'll just start as a fan. And, I remember seeing headlines, Moderna employees build 700 GPTs. I remember this, last year when these headlines started coming out, and I was like, wait, what? Huh? And so the fact that we get to talk to the leader who drove the cultural transformation, and the way I've thought about you is really more of a change management guru. It's a privilege because it's a totally different kind of conversation than the ones that we often have. And so I'm really looking forward to learning from you on the org change, behavior change front.
I think of myself more as a catalyst than a leader, but we can discuss this on your podcast. And we can discuss about what leadership means, right? Like at face value, it means having followers, because otherwise, what are you leading? And if you dig a little bit, it means making sure that your followers, walk by your side and behind you, because otherwise everyone is in danger. And if you dig it a little bit further, it also means that you generate other leaders, that someone, can start working in front of you, and that you're someone who's so important to the tribe that what you've created is an entire community of leaders who know exactly what you're doing and who can do it in their turn. But the truth is that all those different flavors of leadership, even though I love to dive into those considerations of what does it mean nowadays to be a leader? We're no longer in the beginning of the industrial age when people came from the fields and needed to be told everything to do. And still we're organized this way, which is crazy. It still has the notion of a hint of paternalistic, condescending, patronizing, and you can finish my sequence of words attached to the leadership notion, which I think we are very close to the moment where leadership becomes irrelevant as a behavior, right? We still need it for legal purposes, but as a behavior, why would I tell you how to run a podcast, or why would you tell me, even if I were, a leader, I should ask you really, because you're the one doing this. And I don't want people in the company to look up to me for AI. I want them to look up to themselves, right?
So is that how that word catalyst you mentioned? You said catalyst, not leader. How do you define catalyzing AI?
It's very chemical, and it speaks volumes to my people at Moderna, but I think everyone understands. There's a reaction happening of the population with a new technology, right? It's a physical and chemical reaction that's happening. And the only question here is not if it's going to happen, because it's going to happen, whether we want to or not. It's how fast, how safe, and how useful is this chemical reaction going to be? Because maybe without the catalyst, it goes slower, just this, right? And we take 3 years for something we could have done in a year. Wow, shame, because in the meantime, people are dying. Maybe we would have had incidents on the way, which if you're a good catalyst, you de-risk the whole thing and you make sure that you have zero retention, that you have good user policy and code of conduct, that you set up governance, because when you mentioned 700 GPTs, all of those are software in their own right. So people who make a GPT, they are literally digital product makers who put them on the market, who other people use, with all the risks and consequences that it implies. Let's say you do a GPT on travel and expense, but this is not your job. And then the travel expense policy changes. But if people have taken the habit to use your GPT to plan their trip, then they're planning wrong, because it's not your job and you didn't update the knowledge base. So you have not behaved yourself as you should, which is a good product manager on your GPT. And so for some of them, it doesn't matter. It's you're summarizing your meeting notes and, it's okay. But for some others, they can be critical to our business and we can't just let you roll with them. So that's the role of the catalyst, right? To make sure that the whole chemical reaction doesn't explode in your face, right? That's even though you want the chemical reaction to happen and you want it fast and efficient, you also want it safe. And that's my little chemist perspective on the whole thing.
Very cool. Then when somebody's done a GPT, do they inside Moderna feel responsible for the maintaining?
I should certainly hope so. What we did is that we used, as always, you need to look at the categories that pre-exist, because people's minds are already shaped. You can't reshape minds so easily. It can be done, but it's really, really complicated. So I want to climb the Everest by the south face, not the north face. And the south face is to use concepts that are there already. So there is something in the toolbox, which is incident management, where you have one axis, which is how many people are impacted, and another axis, which is how critically are they impacted. And then you categorize incidents in this. And that's a framework that most people are familiar with one way or the other. So I used that framework and applied it to what happens if your GPT doesn't work, which can just mean, in the case that we shared, that the information and travel expense are not up to date, right? That it's not working. Like it's working, but it's not working. And so on one axis, we have, is it just you? Is it a team? Is it the entire company? Like how many people are impacted? On the other axis, is it a mild disturbance? Is it really annoying or is it catastrophic? Right? And then we're going to start rating, depending on really on what happens if your GPT doesn't provide an ideal outcome, the criticality of your GPT. And we're going to tag every combination of those two axes with concrete GPT examples for people to realize what they are. And then we ask people, for now, but I have a better idea next, but for now we ask people to assess themselves, their GPT or their team's GPTs if they're a manager, and
to actually plot it on this.
We're not asking them for rocket science either. And then we have just a series of consequences of where they are on the 3x3, right? If they are like 1 and 1, meaning like it's just me and it's a mild nuisance, then we ask you to follow the user policy, period. It's the only thing that everyone has to do. But if you're like a 3x3 and it's the whole company and it's super critical, then we have 21 requirements for you, including change logs, including a review committee, including a compliance review, and so on and so on.
Okay, so I want us to roll back a little bit because we've dove straight into the deep end, which is not atypical of this podcast. But can we start with your perspective as catalyst? I mean, I'm not a chemist, so I'm going to botch this analogy, but I'm just going to go with you. You're about to add the catalyst to the reaction. What are the considerations you make before you catalyze this reaction?
Yeah,
which is to say, what are you thinking as you dive into the Moderna context? Because you came from Google, right? You've been involved with a bunch of AI change management programs. What were your considerations coming in, and what were some of the early moves you made as the catalyst?
Yes. So I think first we need to understand why we're even here. And I like to always emphasize why, not how. A lot of people are thinking of what they do in terms of how. And it's very dangerous because in times of change, your how is going to betray you, whereas your why is going to uplift you really. If you have a strong why, a strong purpose, any change in, especially technology change, is actually an opportunity because your why suddenly has a new venue. But if you're a how person, any change is a threat because the way you are doing things is suddenly under siege. So you really have to, for yourself and for everyone around you, go back to why, right? Like take a moment to separate the why and the how and to make people refocus and realign, re-anchor themselves in their whys because that gives them a completely different spin on novelty and on new technology. And you should do this yourself. So for myself, the why is not a given. Right? Why should I operate this change? So here the base notion is that we have waves of utility really that come our way. Like, we could go all the way back to language and tap water, but let's just take the one that's at hand here. Electricity, laptops, internet, AI. Right? Like the magic quadrant of those 4 things. And maybe you think electricity is, but I have been in situations where like you don't have a charger anymore. And your digital life is under threat.
That's the base of Maslow's hierarchy in a digital era.
You better have a power bank in your backpack because otherwise at some point, this whole digital bliss that you're in is going to have an abrupt stop. So electricity, devices, internet, AI are the 4 things we owe anyone who works, at least in the knowledge work, but I think in work in general now. And so there's a utility missing in the corporate world. I have it in my life. Everyone on my team has it. Everyone at Moderna, I would say at this point, has it. But I don't think you can work decently without it anymore. And so if this is the baseline, then what I'm operating for is mass adoption because the revolution we're talking about is not so much the ML revolution. It's been there for a decade now, actually really for 40 years, but accessible for a decade. But it was like a 5-star hotel at the end of a dirt road, like super hard to do and super hard to use. And now the dirt road is paved. It's like a highway, right? Because you can just ask in English and receive in English or in Danish or in any other language. And so if this is the revolution, it's a democratization revolution, then I need to listen to everyone, right? Like this is not me driving some expertise transformation in this or that field. So I do mass discovery programs where I interview hundreds of people. I have a methodology for this. And I use AI for this, by the way. I use AI for AI a lot because otherwise it soon becomes overwhelming. And I'm going to start by one of my favorite sentences is listen before you think.
I like that. You're talking about, I just want to make sure this is clear for the audience. You're talking about the attitude of the catalyst prior to entering the reaction is listen before you think.
Okay. Right. Because otherwise you are very likely to placate something that has worked for you and that you thought was super useful. Say adoption of AI for a retailer in 2018, trying to, get out of Amazon and build their own thing with a public cloud that's either Microsoft or Google's in most cases. And you're going to think, oh, that worked for me. Like that was super useful. I have lots of key learnings from there. Let's just apply this to Moderna and Generative. And you would be dead wrong because this is so different on every dimension. It's a whole new world. It's a whole different technology. It's a whole new way of thinking. It redistributes power in a very different way in the fabric of the company. You really have to pause and think what you're dealing with and what you're catalyzing this time around.
So you said you listen, you conduct hundreds of interviews and you use AI for AI. What happens next?
Well, next, I anchor on 3 key notions. You're so wonderfully curious because no one ever asked me this. My first notion is the challenge, because that's what's going to drive the whole thing. Like, what are we trying to accomplish that will be extraordinary? So it's something to the effect of how could we, and here I'm not reinventing entirely, it's very design thinking centric, right? Like at some point you want a user-driven challenge, which is to the effect of how could we, right? It doesn't have to be this, but that's like 90% of the case. Sometimes it's going to start by how could we. And then you need objectives. And I say this because otherwise you're going to be floating in a form of abstraction layer. You need concrete things that can anchor what success looks like. So as part of the discovery template, because there's a template to it, I ask 7 questions. And my 6th question, the one before the last, which is the most important question, every other leads to there, and the last one is kind of a way to chill out from it. My 6th question is, what would make you say that we have succeeded together beyond all expectations? Because this is how I anchor the why that people have on themselves to something that is very driven, and I get the key to unlock their ultimate hope and expectation, professionally at least. And that sentence informs me on what we're dealing with more than anything else, right? It's just a one sentence. So having a collection of hundreds of those, I can start now creating objectives because they gave me something very concrete. I think, what would make you say? And it has to be something I can observe or measure.
When you ask people about the why and how do we succeed, do you feel that everybody now knows the kind of like the universe on which that they could answer? Because obviously
The possibility space. Yeah.
they might not even know, right?
Yeah, this is a perfect question. It's exactly right. No, and they shouldn't. So the last thing in the world that I want is to influence, because maybe they say, what would make me say is like if we were on the front page of the New York Times, and that's their point. What would make me say that if I had $1 billion in my bank account? All right. What would make me say, like if we discover a new physics particle thanks to AI or a new type of protein that revolutionizes life science? And even with my few examples there, you immediately see that we're dealing with different types of personalities and different types of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, right? Like the ones who come from your self-realization or the ones who come from your needs. So I'm already there. I'm starting to understand the components of the reaction, right? Like how many do you have of each categories? Like what are we dealing with? How much in change management, and you heard my section school analogy with like the 5 positions versus change.
I'm just going to put a note in that. I would love for you to talk about bellwethers.
So happy to. And I have other cow analogies, by the way. I have a series of cow stories.
Oh, good. Of course. Very French. But you were saying.
So all this to say that as you listen to them and you ask that question, the art of the possible in terms of answers is extraordinary. I probably have done this type of interview more than 10,000 times in my life now. Because I started doing those 25 years ago, and they have evolved, but I always ask that question. It was always one of my key questions, even 25 years ago when I was starting. So we're doing thousands and thousands of those interviews across the decades, right? And first, no one has ever answered that question right off the bat. It's never happened. Everyone pauses and is like, oh, that's a good question. Which tells you something is that people don't quite dare think about success beyond their wildest expectations. They live in the middle game of good success or like not catastrophic failure.
Wow, that's huge.
It's interesting, right? Because I can tell you, out of 10,000 discovery interviews, I have never, ever had someone who could answer that question straight up the bat. Never.
And do you then feel that it's your responsibility to help them go there, or is the answer that they provide the answer that is the answer?
It's my responsibility to try the best path to the highest self-actualization of the most people possible. Sometimes it happens because not everyone's going to get exactly where they want to go. Like when you interview 100 people and they're just representing 6,000, you have a galaxy of objectives. And I call this organizational awareness, right? Like I'm very anchored in organizational awareness, like understanding the momentum and the profound achievement desire of the organization in its individuals and in its collective aspect. And because I use that notion of organizational awareness, I never use the word politics. Because the good part of politics is organizational awareness, is to understand who's trying to achieve what and be mindful of it when you speak with people or when you act, or when you communicate. Everything else really is like useless and toxic parts of behaviors. So for me, I want to anchor on that part of what other people can talk about as being politics.
Okay, so I want to make sure we get to the third thing, because you said you anchor on 3 key notions, right? So first one I wrote down was, what would we try to accomplish that's extraordinary, the kind of the design thinking oriented, how might we kinds of provocations. The second thing is objectives, concrete things on which I can anchor success. What's the third key notion?
Objectives give you the bar of success or failure. And it shouldn't be subjective. It shouldn't be something that is object of interpretation. Like you do or don't have $1 billion in your bank account. You are or you are not on the front page of the New York Times. But this is undeniable, right? And by the way, one last point on this for Henrik, we might end up with objectives that no one ever formulated. But that when I hear 100 of those, then we elevate the whole conversation and think if we do those 3 things, all of these people are going to be happy, right? Like it is not the art of certainly not the art of the least common denominator, which would be terrible, but not even the art of the best common denominator. It's more like understanding the colors that you're painting with and then painting. And because it's very rare that I actually take one specific sentence and put it there. It can happen when someone had like a blaze of glory and gave me something like, that perfectly encapsulated what you've been hearing. And I'm taking this as it is. But most often it's a lot of work. And the third category is criteria. It comes from the Greek quinine, which means to sort the grain. And it also gives you like a movie critics or a critical situation or a critical disease, right? So it's what differentiates the good from the bad in a way of sorting things, right? Sorting the grain. And so out of all the notions, ideas, and initiatives that could lead us there, I will favor, and here come your criteria, the ones that are the fastest to implement, are the easiest to roll out at scale, are the ones which will have the best impact versus their cost, right? Like those are the most obvious. There's a little funny exercise to do, which sometimes I do with some of the leaders especially. I present them with complete impossible answers to the challenge. So let's say you're trying to do pageant contest on Miss Universe and you propose Einstein. Like, will he work or will he not work? So for some reasons, I don't think Einstein would cut it to be Miss Universe. But from some other reasons and from some other aspects, I think he'd be a perfect candidate. Very telegenic, pretty bright, lots of ideas, a good coverage of both continents, US and Europe. Like, I like him for Miss Universe. But then, there's a gender question hanging there. There's an Einstein at what age? Maybe in his 20s, but like we all think of his in the 70s. So, and you see there, I already just have like 5 criteria. Just there. And because I choose a purposefully wrong solution, it forces judgment to activate. And we have the same grid for right and wrong solutions, but it's harder to elucidate the grid of our own judgment on something that is relevant because it's implied. Whereas if you take an answer that is completely irrelevant, all of your grid of judgment is going to jump to the throat of that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So it strikes me one thing that's just becoming clear here is this is not the case of an individual who's already in the organization who's just kind of catalyzing a movement because they got excited about it. there's such deep consideration before you ever decide to call it jump into the Moderna reaction, so to speak. Do you feel that that's actually an important part of the change, is that the you've done some, you could call it some qualification of the organization ahead of time. I just think a lot of times folks think about changing where they are. And it strikes me that in a way, I feel you actually probably were brought in as a concerted strategic decision. We need to accomplish a transformation. How important is that in your entire success story?
I can't speak entirely to it because this was not only my decision. It's a shared decision, right? Like to join.
Yeah.
But I will say this. We met before the pandemic with Stefan, the CEO of Moderna, and part of the board who visited Google. And we had a professional crush. You know, it was on Valentine's Day, and I came back home and told my wife, if I wasn't, you know, so much in love with Google, I would be working at Moderna. And then the pandemic happened, and it was very obvious to me how important Moderna was, maybe one of the most important companies in the world. And at that time and still today, whatever the rest of the world thinks. And that what they just done could never be done again the same way, right? Like never again will 100 people huddle in corridors of a single place on Earth to just unlock the biggest problems in manufacturing a solution for mankind. So in my line of work, you immediately know when you're seeing something that is the early stage of maturity curve and that's never going to happen again. And one of the biggest dangers for those organizations is that they anchor on initial success. And so I sent a note to Stefan saying, you can do this again and again and again, but you're going to have to change the way you do it every single time, right? So if you're interested, I think I know how to give you a permanent first mover advantage. But it's going to take deep change at every step of the way. You're never going to be able to do it twice the same way. And that spoke to him. So 20 minutes later, I had a reply from him. So I wasn't sure, it's like a bottle, you know, in the ocean. And 2 hours later, my children were registered in the school at Boston, right? Like, because in case it works out.
Okay, so you talk about speed of the reaction. That's pretty quick. 20-minute response from the CEO. 2 hours later, you're enrolling your kids across the country.
Well, it was Valentine's Day. That's when you have to enroll your children. If you see what the calendar year looks like for schools, February is when you need to start activating yourself. So I couldn't afford to wait whatever time it was going to take for interviews or whatever, and then find out that my children are not registered at school. So you have to immediately think about the chain of consequences of a good decision. It's very Moderna-like too, by the way. Like, I love this culture because the number one mindset of Moderna is act with urgency. So we were not reckless. We're like so thoughtful, but sometimes we see the moment and we just see it. So I would say that certainly Stefan had in mind that initial contract we had. But then my first round of interviews, I did 3 in a short sequence. My first round of interviews was on the readiness for change of the company. And then my second round of interview, which was a year and a half later, was on digital practices at Moderna. And then my third one was on AI. So I did 3 times a round of more than 100 interviews in the 10 that I did. And I'm about to do a 4th one, by the way. Because now we have a 4th, iteration of challenges that requires to go back to listening before you think. So the first time was the readiness for change, and we discussed. The second time was IT foundations, digital foundations, and then we discussed. And I actually ended up being in charge of those with a team called Digital Empowerment for a year and a half. So electricity, laptops, internet, like this thing, because it had broken under the strain of hypergrowth, and there's no AI transformation if you don't have electricity. It's game over. And then the third one was about AI, and the one that I have to work with now is ways of working. We need to transform how we work in profound ways, and maybe even the culture of how we work needs to change.
And that even in an organization which has as a foundational premise, act with urgency.
Let me give you a simple example. There is no more individual contributors in a company nowadays. Those days are over. Now everyone is a team of 5. Themselves, an assistant, a coach, an expert, and a creative partner. Right?
Can I ask you a question that I've been thinking a lot about in the organization I'm enrolled in, that the flattening of the hierarchy, right? Like the removal of the fat pillow in the middle, the change from a traditional, let's say, Army structure to a Navy SEAL structure. Navy SEALs that report straight to the president. There are 7 people. they get an objective, they don't. mm, I I have been wondering if it's because of digital tools like the Slacks of the world, and now with AI, obviously information flows are now available to people who sit close to the customer or close to the problem that need to be
Yeah.
solved. And so, to your point, it does seem that we are close to this completely re-architecture of organizational design. And I think, and where I think that I got added kind of like intrigued about this is I think we talked to, I think it was Kevin Kelly who mentioned that when electricity came online, suddenly a lot of stuff had to foundationally get changed. Like factories had to be rebuilt in a different ways because, obviously it changed. And so I was wondering if, because you mentioned it at the beginning and it's such an interesting kind of discussion, maybe you could put a few words to how you think about that.
So we're going to get philosophical about horizontal and vertical division of work, of labor. It used to be that humans were holistic and could do everything, right? Like Stradivarius did his own violins himself entirely from end to end. But then when he died, the recipe got forgotten. Like it was never a collective achievement that mankind could pride itself with. It was a single person topic that withered, and then no one knows how to do Stradivarius anymore. And then we were thrust into horizontal and vertical division of labor. I think the horizontal part, has ever expanded because now the number of proficiencies and expertise and, deep rabbit holes of like amazing knowledge in one field or another, I don't think I've ever seen it slow down. If anything, it grows exponentially, even though it doesn't have to be all embedded within the same organization, but when you think of it at the scale of the fabric of work. But the vertical division of labor, I think, is a plight. Like, I think it's something really, people spend too much time thinking about their next promotion. It's a completely toxic line of thought that kind of, is a permanent mental burden on their minds. And we see it going back and forth with I think it was overused at first when you had those huge hierarchies with like 20 levels of hierarchies. And we've seen those like in corporate organizations with levels 1 to level 20s and things like this. And you have to wonder what level 13 does, apart from relaying from level 14 to level 12 and managing up to 11 other levels or whatever. So it's that part is much more under scrutiny. I think even the excuse for it, which was vertical integration of conglomerates, is no longer there because now we live more in hives, right, of different, small expert teams. I love that quote from, What Changes the World. It's a small team of dedicated men and women. Because if you're by yourself, you're not going to change the world. But if you're a crowd, you're not going to change the world either. You have to be one of those small teams that accomplish something fantastic. Even if we take the invention at hand here, right, like the Transformers, was a team of 8 at Google. Right, that's the exact right team that changes the world. Like none of them individually could have done something like this. But if they'd been a group of 40 in a committee with subcommittee and secretaries and recorded meetings, like this is game over. So I call this the dinner conversation size, right? Like at what size do you still think you can have a good dinner conversation? Right.
It's a classic 2-pizza team. It's Bezos' 2-pizza team.
Yeah, definitely. I'm more encouraged on the conversation and the food. And I know that the food means the number, but depending on the topic and the people, like for instance, this is the dinner table, the 3 of us there. How many more people could even put a word like with a speaker like me, like occupying the field all the time, and you with all your brilliant questions, and Henrik like being, the sharpshooter, bringing that little nudge at the right moment that kind of raises the conversation. So this is a full table, and 2 pizzas would be too much for the 3 of us. Now, on other topics, I could have 12, 15 people with different roles and good organization. And I think Team 6 is 100 soldiers, right? Like, so we've seen good commandos of 100 people who know how to organize something efficiently. So I don't want to anchor too much on the exact size as a fixed number, more on what is the topic at hand and the people around the table, and when am I going to stop having a good conversation? We all have that feeling, right? Like if I'm not going to have Jeremy and Henrik at dinner. And you know this yourselves, because at the extreme of this, if it's like the most interesting romantic partner, you're going to want to have a dinner with only 2 people around the table.
Right. Exactly. Nobody else can get invited to it.
So, right.
I wanted to go back to your your 4 components. You said 4 things for utility for knowledge worker are 1, electricity, 2, devices, 3, internet, and 4, AI. And then you made a statement. You said, people at Moderna feel you cannot work decently without AI. I mean, I want to make sure, 1, did I hear you correctly? And 2, how do you know they feel that way? And 3, how did they get to the point
You're
they
right.
feel that way?
Like, I feel that way. And the outcome of my interview with them confirms or informs how I feel about it, right? And then at some point I reach a conclusion out of all those interviews that no, this is not something we should reserve, say, to the developers of the company, and that they should use Gen AI to improve their code. And maybe to 100 scientists. No, this is something that not a single person that I've ever met didn't speak with glimmers in their eyes of how I could augment them. So you start to see chief AI officers here and there, right? And this is going to have a very short shelf life. It's like being a chief mobile officer in 2012 or something, right? Like the true name they should have is chief augmentation officer, right? It doesn't sound perfect and we're not used to it, but it's all about augmenting people individually and collectively. How high can I raise you? I often joke to people at Moderna when I do this in like slightly public, conversations where town halls or things like this, that they all joined as heroes and that we're going to equip them to turn them into superheroes. And that they're all the Selena Skies and the Bruce Waynes of the world, and that we're going to turn them into Batmans and Catwomen.
Can you tell me about the first thing you did? I think there was a contest.
Yeah,
Is that right?
It's not exactly the first thing I did, but you're right. Like in that third round. So remember, it was the third round of something, right? There's a round on change readiness and a round on, let's say, digital readiness.
It's kind of preparing the soil.
They required you feel? Because I think a lot of people are now just sitting, from day 0. They're not even like, you're like so many cycles ahead, but a lot of organizations just sitting there and go like, hey, I understand that I need to augment people with this new superpower. I just don't even know how to get going. What I hear a little bit you're saying is that you kind of need to do that foundational work before you can even get to the AI part.
Well, at least to have awareness of it, because if my interviews had told me that this was a robust, change-ready, digitally ready organization, I would probably go straight to round 3, right? Like with very lean recommendations for the first 2 or lean initiatives, lean catalyst reactions. In this case, it's not because, there's an interesting point there. It's not because people are digitally literate at Moderna. They are all very, very good at digital. Like this is one of the smartest organizations with some of the most educated people I've met in my life as a company. The challenge is that in their case, there's kind of a ghost curve of the usefulness of digital culture. If you don't have any at all, we're going to have to build some. If you have too much, we're going to have to unbuild some. Because in my case, those are people who've spent 20 years of their life dealing with bioinformatics. And this is going to be like the sound of thunder in the blue sky when they are exposed to Gen AI. Because really, we should acknowledge together that there's this and that kind of software. This kind of software does the same thing all the time. And if you give it instruction, you get an outcome, and you give it 1,000,000 times the instruction, you get 1,000,000 times the same outcome, this software. And then there's that kind of software that if you give it an instruction, it gives you an outcome. If you give it another, it gives you another outcome. And you can do this 1,000,000 times, you can have 1,000,000 different outcomes. And that kind of software is easily anthropomorphized because we're used to it from humans. We're just not used to it from software. And so we tend to anthropomorphize it, even though it's so wrong on so many different levels, because it doesn't have intent, it doesn't have agency, it doesn't have agenda. Like there's a lot of things here that are probably not human at all. But certainly the part of it that will never give me a joke twice the same way, I've met before, right? Like, and these are my friends. So we need for people to grapple with the fact that there's this and that type of software. Let me give you a super concrete and basic example. It baffles most people that Gen AI can't do mid-level math. If you say 2 and 2 is going to say 4, so it does math. But if you say 258 multiplied by 725, it's game over. It's going to give you a complete wrong number. Why? because it does guesswork. So it's guessing math, right? As you know this, it's it's guessing the next word in the sentence and making kind of diversified guesses, which is the beauty of it. But diversification of guesses for math is wrong. It's plain wrong. This is when you have to go from, kindergarten to school, right? At some point, you can't get math. You have to do the math. But people are baffled because they don't understand that we're thinking about that kind of software, and that kind of software is creative in the essence. It's going to be doing creative math, right? Which is not what you want there. So there's a lot of ways to go around this. You can trigger Python scripts to run your calculations. You can use reflective models like O1 or O1 Pro to break down the construct of how they do a math demonstration and they deliver the outcome. We're not out of ideas to get some form of reliability out of models, but the basic foundation, the cultural acceptation of software in our society is not there. It is not on that kind of software. It's on this kind of software. And if you don't explain the difference to your people, you're immediately in danger of people starting to do calculations with concrete outcomes that have impact on the company and your customers, and that are just wrong, right? So that's why we need those layers of culture to build in. I'm very optimistic because if you look at chess, no chess player in the world would play without an AI. Another sentence that I like is the end is the beginning. Everyone used to say that when Deep Blue beat Kasparov at chess, it was the end of chess. And if you look at what has happened, there's 10 times more license owners for the Chess Federation. The level of grandmasters has exploded. The number of grandmasters has exploded. We now have 2,000 grandmasters. Their level is 300 to 500 points on average higher than the best grandmasters of 20 years ago because they were raised in the age of AI. And when the model says that the move is wrong, the move is wrong. Even Magnus Carlsen doesn't say that the model maybe has it right or wrong and that he thinks this. No. If the move is wrong, the move is wrong. And Magnus Carlsen knows better than to challenge it. But the way that it informs how you learn and understand chess, the way that you grow with the support of that AI that always knows the right move from the wrong move, and then you can realize any game and look back into scenario and branching hypothesis of why was that the right move? Only 9 moves later are you going to find out. But you have to move your rook there because actually 9 moves later, that's where the queen is going to add on the other side. And then you learn, and the game of chess itself has metamorphosed in the last 20 years. There's been more progress in chess in 20 years than in all the rest of the history of chess for 8,000 years combined. And I think this is about to happen almost everywhere. Think about medical diagnosis. You still have doctors who confront AI and medical diagnosis, even though doctors are right 60 to 70% of the times on average. And AI software now, is right 90% of the times on average on simple diagnosis. Radiologs, they've gotten used to it. If you do an X-ray or a scan, the AI knows better, period. But some general practitioners still think that they know better than the AI. And maybe for now, in some cases they do, right? We're edging towards, but those days are counted. You see, my point is, how do you make everyone into a team manager of those 5 people we discussed and into an AI chess player, into the Magnus Carlsen of their own field? A level of chess that was unprecedented.
Right now, and there's still, I was just talking with some friends about this weekend. Right now, most people, if you ask the question, did you use AI for this? The right answer is, don't worry, I did it myself. That's kind of the right. I know, and you laugh, right? Because you're from the future, right? But I think what you know and what we are learning and increasingly learning is the right answer to that question is, of course I am. Do you want me to not use every tool available to me to do the best work possible? But the sad reality is, I bet, Brice, I don't know what the number is, 95, if not 99% of professional workers, the right answer in their mind is, don't worry, I didn't use any AI. That's the right answer. That's what their boss wants to hear. That's what their colleagues want to hear. And so there's this enormous, in a sense, Moderna's a bellwether. We didn't get to bellwether yet, but Moderna's a bellwether. Because right now, there are very few other organizations where the leader would laugh when I said, don't worry, I didn't use AI, right? You laughed out loud.
Yeah.
That shows how radically progressive you all are.
But you're spot on. I would never do anything without layers of AI integrated into it. Why would I? It is so risky and reckless and stupid and limited. I have no words for it. But then it's like asking someone, would you do this without a laptop? Or have you done the calculation by hand? Yeah, I promise. The calculation by hand will be better on paper. Don't worry, I didn't use any software.
This the other day, we were having an interview with somebody, and then it was noticed that they were clearly using AI for all the answers. Like it was like an interview, and they clearly had a machine. And like today, if somebody came into an office and saying, you know what, just before we do the interview, I just want to let everybody know I don't do computers and I don't use the internet because
Right.
that's just not my thing. I mean, like people just go like, who are you, right? But it seems weird that there's now increasingly a polarized world where there's people like you, Brice, who, thinks and breathe this, and in by osmosis, your organizations do the same. And then there is the most of the organization and most of the people that are not even kind of like starting to step onto that ladder.
Yeah, well, there's another level of optimism there that's ahead of us because people are lazy. And I don't blame them. It's a Darwinian advantage. They try to get the best outcome out of the least effort. This is who we are as a species. And so when they see a way, it hits them in the face instantly. So Gen AI, and per the vector of OpenAI and ChatGPT, is at this point the fastest ever adopted technology, right? So this is not something that has gone completely unnoticed. And by the way, you can hardly open a newspaper or listen to a blog or a podcast without reading about AI. The most valued company in the world today is NVIDIA because of AI. So like whatever your angle is, you're gonna hear about it, right? And so this is not a stealth operation, Gen AI. This is very much in your face wherever you turn your face. So I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, look at this amazing tsunami of change message that we're receiving now as a society. I don't think that I've ever seen anything like this. Like I can tell you because I was there that computing was not like this and mobile phones were not like this either. It took maybe a decade for mobile phones to kind of get some semblance of a footprint in our daily lives.
So you're saying the problem will take care of itself?
I'm saying that
Like
it's
that
going to happen whether they want to or not.
It's inevitable. Yeah.
I'm not here to make sure that people in Moderna use AI. They're going to use AI. I'm here to make sure they use it before the others or before, the diseases are upon us, because we are more a competing company against the burden of disease than against any other pharma company, if I'm honest. Or the next pandemic. And if we're going to do this in a way that makes people feel safe and feel elated, because I want them to do this in joy. And change can be very enjoyable. We all feel and know this intuitively. You love a new book. You love a new movie. You love a brand new jacket. You love a new lover. You love a new job. You love a new political figure that's inspiring. So I just think it's deeply rooted in human nature to root for change and novelty. We're a neophyte species, which is why we have all these different teeth, right? Like we have teeth to cut fibers, to eat meat, to grind peas and so on. Like we are omnivorous creatures who can adapt to anything. We have Eskimos on the North Pole. We have Bedouins in the desert. We have people who go scuba diving. We have people who go on the moon. So like humans are so vastly adaptable. This is almost our defining trait, right? Like this and running. And so we dig change profoundly, naturally, instinctively. It's just that sometimes people are so bad at this that they find a way to make change painful. And it takes a lot. But there's 3 ways.
Okay. There are 3 ways.
Yeah. You can make it isolated, like you, Jeremy, are going to change, but the rest of us are not. That becomes my rule, because you're going to be the object of scrutiny, mockery, judgment, and so on. I can make it brutal, like, thank you, Jeremy, it was really nice knowing you, but bye-bye, right? So that's change, but it's very brutal. It's very immediate, like there's no gradual way to ease into it, or to prepare for it, or to adapt to it. And I can make sure that you have no voice in it. This is how change is going to happen, whether you want to or not, and period. And so in this way, you can't influence it, you can't contribute to it, you can't find your self-realization in it. So you can use any combination of those 3 superpowers of destructive change, and you're going to mess up change. But naturally, people love change. Like if it's done right, like they're going to enjoy the new movie or the new book. Everything's going to go right.
This conversation is reminding me of your sticker, which I know is on the back of your laptop, which says, "Don't be Fred." Would you tell folks, what is it? What does that mean?
So our CEO, Stefan, famously has a boss when he was in the early years of his professional journey. And that boss's first name was Fred, and we won't say anymore. But Fred had his emails printed and then would write the answer and give the handwritten answer back to his assistant to put it back into the machine and send the email back to the person. And this is, of course, the right technology with the wrong behavior, right? And we don't see much Fred anymore, but they were there for a while. People who had all the tools at their disposal, but just didn't get on board. And there's a notion there also that laptops must be some evolved form of typewriters, which is a tool of lowly people whom I can't compare to myself because I'm a high thinker, right? So there was a notion here, which is why I have instant knee-jerk, caution about vertical division of labor and all its ills. Because the moment you start to think yourself above the fray, and because the fray uses typewriters and I think with my brain, and now there's a better typewriter called a laptop, but I think with my brain and they use a typewriter, you kind of have somehow lost yourself in the way, right? Like something wrong has happened to you. And it's out of pride. It's out of misplaced pride. So it's very important to Stefan that the senior leaders of the company drive change and embody change and champion it and give the example for it. So we're not letting them get away with a Fred-like behavior. And those stickers, in a very fun way, I didn't do them, even though I love them, because I don't have budget for change, zero budget, zero dime. Otherwise, I would use it and I would somehow start to impose change to others, which is not my role here at Moderna. So those stickers were done by the R&D team and by Rose Duffy, who's now our chief research officer. And she launched a whole campaign of don't be afraid, use AI. And I just found out because she came to meet me in the corridor and say, oh, Brice, I did a new sticker campaign. I was looking for you. Would you want a sticker? And I was like, show me, And I was so blown away. And I thought this was such a great initiative. And of course, I proudly have the don't be afraid, use AI sticker on my laptop. But even more proudly because I didn't do it. I didn't even cultivate or be part of it.
It's brilliant. Okay, you said a phrase that I've got to follow up on. You said you can't let senior leaders get away with Fred-like behavior. One, what's an example of a Fred-like behavior? And two, how do you not let them get away with it?
Yeah, all right. So an example of Fred-like behavior is you're like in your messaging application, let's say Teams channel, where you have like 500 messages, let's say on AI. And you have one of two Fred behaviors there that are possible. The first one is to scroll through them. And the second one is to type in the search bar and search for keywords. In both cases, you're doomed because how are you ever going to find insights out of 500 messages in a Teams channel on AI by either ways? Like, can you scroll your way through them? Can you actually type Boolean research through them? Like it's impossible. So the normal way is you open your AI Chrome extension, which we call MChat. We have this at Moderna. It understands immediately the entirety of your fields in Teams, and you ask it questions. You engage with conversation. You used to have data research from assets or conversation with experts. Now you can have conversation with assets. Is that correct? And those assets include long email threads or long conversations in a messaging app, right? So I can say, what are the 5 most often met challenges with AI in this thread, which is thread open to the whole company. And it's going to immediately read everything and categorize me the 5 most commonly found obstacles to AI adoption. And then I'm going to say, considering the way that people have answered each other in this conversation, out of crowd wisdom, which would be the 3 best ways to solve each of those top challenges? And then I'm going to learn from crowd wisdom. And that, I think, is a modern behavior, right?
That's such a deeply personal thing. I mean, not to get big brother, but when you say don't let folks get away with Fred-like behavior, and I love those 2 examples, scrolling and typing, because it's something that all of us do every day, or that we're all Fred in that sense. How do you enforce a new behavior in that kind of context?
You remember how I told you probably half an hour ago that I was entering the 4th round, which was around ways of working? So that's the topic ahead of us. There's obviously 2 different ways of working. I witnessed them firsthand. We have people who are true AI champions way beyond myself at Moderna and who amaze us with what they do with AI. And we have people who still haven't onboarded the train. It's okay, but just the train is gaining speed. So like, I don't want them to rip their arms away while they onboard the train. So it's more a matter of keeping cohesion on our social fabric. I don't want to leave anyone on the bottom of the route. So I need to go back to listening before I think on this. Right? I don't have to use like I know that something has to be done, I know that there are precedents to it, but I don't want to placate one of my precedents on the current situation because this situation has never happened before. And by the way, I would love the recording of this conversation if you'd be so kind, because you asked me all the right questions, all the right orders, and so I have things to do with it on AI.
I mean, like, it's
Absolutely.
also incredible just how often now that I record a conversation, and then because that you can use this conversation as the base of GPT outputting something. I mean, like, all the time now, because you formulate yourself and your, at least I do, in thoughts in these meetings, sometimes even coming up with stuff that you didn't even know that you had in your mind, right?
And so that's another example of be fair or don't be afraid. This is a perfect example of friend-like behavior. So not only do I always record, like I came to this conversation and I was informed before I joined you that this was recorded. So I knew this was, and we never even had to talk about it. When it's not, I would immediately ask, is it okay if I record this conversation? Because I don't know how it's going to go. And it might be something that I want to look back at and kind of re-examine with a different type of lens. We can go back to chess. At the end of your chess game, you always want to run the analysis with Stockfish and look back at every move you made and how right or wrong it was, right? Every conversation for me is a little chess game that I want to realize with AI. And so sometimes it's a very straightforward game, and I don't mean much depth of analysis, but in a case like this conversation, I really want to do it. And then there's a third case in which people would like to, but we are like on a different platform, they don't know how or anything. So I always have my phone with other AI on it, which is post recognition. And then I would ask them permission to record it separately from the interface. They would say yes or no. I have yet to come across someone who says no. So normally everyone says yes. And then I just launch recording on my phone, right, which is next to the speaker. And I'm going to have voice recognition and complete recording everything that was said and use it back, right? So it's rare cases because most often now the platforms allow for it and you'll know how to use them. But having those conversations without the transcript is like writing back with your hand and pencil to an email, right?
And also, just as a tip, I was doing a brainstorm in the Danish National Bank the other day. We were 12 people discussing the Draghi report, like why Europe is, falling behind. And I literally just put the phone on the table, 14 people, and I was like, no way it's going to pick everything up. Same thing, put it into Otter AI, and just had to tag who the different people were. But a full transcript, and then obviously, half an hour after the meeting, I could send not just kind of like a resume, but also what was the takeaway from the different people. Yeah. It's just such a brilliant experience.
Yes. So let me give you a personal version of this, just for entertainment. I'm just out of parent-teacher conference because it's the end of the year. I have 2 kids, they have some common teachers, and they are in French-American schools, so half of them are French, half of them are American. So I had 16 back-to-back parent-teacher conference interviews to do. My experience with those has been dismal historically. Like I take a few notes of few words, I barely understand what they tell me. Like it's complicated because you're focused on the conversation, but there's so little time. So this time I did with AI. So I got every conversation recorded and turned with the agreement of the teachers and who were very interested in how that was going to go and the outcome and so on. Out of this, I did a synthesis for each of my kids. I have 2 children and for a household, like what is it for us as a family? Then I asked another AI model to present the key findings, conclusions, and next steps to a 12-year-old. So one of my child is 11, the other one is 12 years old. So it just reframed the entire summary and next steps of the meeting for a 12-year-old. And it did it beautifully. It was perfect. And then I asked it to propose table games for us that would drive us in a fun and friendly way because we're French, so we have family dinners here. And these are our exploration environments every evening, to propose new table games which would lead to the best possible outcome for both my children in the things that their teachers had highlighted. And I got out of these 5 table games, which are so brilliant, which we now really enjoy a lot and have a lot of fun with, and that exactly hone in on the exact skills that the teachers of my children said, I wish I would see more of this or more of that from them.
That's such a cool example.
Such a good example.
So it's a small thing. It's very natural, right? But you see also one thing that for this one time, I'm going to take this example as like a reference. It has been my assistant in taking notes. It has been my coach because I also asked it for each interview if I asked the right questions and how I could improve myself as a parent in parent-teacher conferences. And I had a very, because you have 16 back-to-back, so you can make strong progress there. This is a very highly iterative sequence, the parent-teacher conferences. I think I was a much better parent at the 16th iteration of this than at the first, if I'm honest, based on the guidance from the model. And then, of course, it was an expert on education principles and how to leverage them and so on. And then it was a creative partners to design table games. So the team of 5 has operated there on something that couldn't matter more to me, which is the future of my kids.
Can I just say, because I'm a doofus and I'm happy to be the lead doofus of this podcast, you said earlier that every team was comprised of 5 people, and you were saying AI augmented individuals are now at least 5 people: the individual, the assistant, the coach, the expert, the creative partner. I'm just saying that because if I missed it, I'm sure an audience member missed it. Brice was not saying that every team at Moderna is 5 people. He's saying every individual is now hyper augmented. I just wanted to put a fine point on that.
Yeah, and I hope I give you a very concrete, relatable example of this.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. There's one question that I have. I want to hear a little bit more about the role of the champions. I've heard you talk about that. Is it GCAT?
Yes. GACT, Generative AI Champions Team, which are also the 4 bases of the DNA: guanine, adenine, cytine, thymine. So it's a little play on the acronym of the 4 bases of the DNA with our champions group, because we are that kind of company. And you need to create social momentum mechanisms, right? You need relays and amplifiers and also thought partners of at different levels of this. Very often I would compare management and the vertical labor organization, which we discussed in this conversation, to a resourcing system like the bloodstream in the body, right? Like the core last role, whatever you think of management, is to allocate resources and prioritize the allocation of resources. But then there's another system in the human body, which is the nervous system. And even though you could map it in a way that overlaps for some parts the blood system, it is not the same. It doesn't operate at the same speed, it doesn't have the same relays, it doesn't have the same, chemistry, and it just doesn't connect to the same central organ to begin with. And so we need a nervous system also in something as vital and critical as a change management program for a paradigm transformation, which is AI. And so I want to think of the nervous system of the company. I can't afford not to know something that is happening in very key parts of the company. I think they can't afford not to know what we're doing at the platform level either. And so we need to send signals to each other. This is unrelated to resource. So it doesn't have to map exactly hierarchy or management. And by the way, it doesn't. It more maps proficiency and time investment and willingness to share with others, right? What you need from your nervous system. So when we did that prompt contest at the early stages of phase 3, which was the AI adoption phase, we asked everyone who had a modern identity to propose ideas on what to prompt with AI and how this could be useful to them. And we got 180 concrete winners out of that prompt contest. And we used AI to summarize and leverage the insights out of those, which is, by the way, how I know of the team of 5. We ended up finding that those 180 prompts fell in 4 categories, right? And we could have subcategories, but the assistant, the expert, the coach, the creative partner. So out of all the thousands of propositions and the hundreds of winners, those were the 4 categories. And we wrote a blog post for the whole company. It was titled 180 Things We Learned From You on AI. Because I wanted to highlight that I was not going to teach AI to anyone. Like they were going to teach AI to me or to everyone else. And that's what's happening there, right? That collective momentum that you want to trigger, and you need relays for it. So the GACT, they are the winners of the prompt contest. And to win that prompt contest, you had to propose something that was really great. And then you put it out there on the Teams channel. And you have to be upvoted by your peers. So anyone who has a modern identity can upvote you. All they have to do is put an emoticon on your idea. An emoji, right? Cool. But the winners are the ones who have the best intersection of a great idea and being very popular. And those are my champions. Because if you have the best possible ideas, but no one wants to upvote you because somehow you haven't gained favors from anyone around you, I don't know that you can be my champion. And if you're like the nicest person in the world, but you can't for the life of you put together a prompt, I don't know that you can be my champion either, right? Like, so the
The Venn diagram is really critical there.
little two-bubble Venn diagram, but I need people who are imaginative and good at prompting AI, and who other people want to upvote because they like them or they like their idea. And those are the essential nodes of the nervous system. So we have some roles that are like, if you will, intermediaries between the champions and us. We have AI integrators who dedicate a part of their job with the agreement of our leadership and their manager to understanding the role that AI is going to play in their teams. And they are a smaller team than the AI champions and kind of more dedicated to it, whereas my job is 100% this, and their job might be 20 or 50% this. Then we have the AI champions and we have the AI enthusiasts. So that's 3,000 people who simply the people who contribute to our forum. We have this Teams channel, which is the biggest team channel of the company by far and wide. It has 3,000 active members. And I think of them, it's half of our population as the AI enthusiast. So 1 out of 2 humans at Moderna is an AI enthusiast who contribute actively to our forum on AI. And then we have the users. It's everyone, right? Everyone is a user, like electricity and
what do the different groups kind of like get or do or get labeled as? Like you said, like you mentioned, obviously your full-time job is this. You have the people that have like 15-20% of their allocated kind of like resource is allocated to this. And then you had like the, other groups. Is that a label or does it come with anything else for being in that group?
So AI integrators are they're very official. They're officially AI integrators, right? It's like acknowledged and it's going to be part of their annual performance review and things like this. AI champions, they're also numerous clauses. We only have a number of them. So currently we have 100 of them. And someone needs to get out for someone to get in. So we did 2 rotations already. We're about to do a 3rd one. So we numbered GCT groups. We're about to do GCT 3.0. And when we think that the mission has shifted enough, we want to reactivate the social contract because you didn't sign up for this. You didn't sign up if you're a champion from round 1, from the prompt contest, to drive new ways of working in Moderna, which is the next objective. So I want to make sure that you have time for this, that you have taste for this, that this is something that you want to be a part of. It's a volunteer group. And certainly they should mention this in their annual performance evaluation, but it wouldn't be held against them if they didn't, right? This is a volunteer group, right? Their journey is their destination. And then for the enthusiasts, no, the forum is open to anyone. We keep talking about it all the time. There's a Golang here. We use Golang, so it's go/AI. Like you can't forget it, Go AI. And I mention it 5 times every time I speak with anyone. It's in my signature, my emails. Like you can't miss it. It's a very broad and wide invitation to just be part of the conversation, to join at your pace on your topics. So that last group is more like it's an open conversation which you're always invited to be a part of.
Brice, I think this is a good place to end. You talked about Moderna and Google had a corporate crush. I think both Jeremy and I now have a corporate crush on you because of your kindness and your thoughtfulness and what you do. So thank you so much for being on.
Wow. What a conversation.
What a conversation. I mean, like, I'm really blown away by him. Like everything, like the way that he communicates, his way of crafting stories. Obviously, he has a methodology for doing something that we all know is very difficult, which is teaching people to ride the AI bike.
I mean, the problem is, dude, I've got like 9 pages of notes here. I'm scrambling as you're talking. I'm just like, where do I start? But I was struck by so many things. I mean, the comment, people don't dare to think of wild success. The fact that no one has had a ready answer to the question of what would make you think we've succeeded beyond expectations, I thought was so fascinating, just as a commentary on human nature, that no one dares to think of wild success. And then, of course, if we want to go towards AI just for a second, I loved his comment that it's stupid, risky, reckless to be doing anything without AI. Yeah. I think right now there's a whole chorus, there's a cacophony. To say chorus implies melody, harmony, etc. It's more like a cacophony of accusations around the recklessness of using AI. And it was so refreshing. And I think just a message from the future, so to speak, to think about the recklessness of not using every technology available to us to do the best work possible, I thought was really astounding. Any sound bites that stood out to you?
I mean, there's a lot of different sound bites, but like, there are so many to your point that, I've tried to write a lot of them down and couldn't really. I think what he really brought forth for me is how this new technology, this and that technology, which also was a good way of thinking about it,
Mhm.
that technology, the alien technology that we now have access to, how it's really going to change, obviously, how the organizations are changed, but also just as we as a human can make ourselves better, like as an individual contributor, like
Yeah.
just his case of like becoming a better parent by becoming better at listening to a teacher, being better of like introducing games, in his family, and all those different things, like being better of listening to the organization when you post a question. I think the big kind of takeaway is actually like just how profound we will have to rethink our capabilities and how we conduct work. And if we do, how incredibly upgraded we can become.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really eager. We should have him back in, say, a year after he's conducted this ways of working set, the fourth round of interviews that he's mentioned. I'll be really eager to hear what comes of that and what the further transformation. I mean, it's fascinating, right? If on the one hand, you look at a company like Moderna and you go, they're already so far ahead. And yet the sense of uh, discontent, proper, humble discontent. I get the impression talking to him that they're just starting their transformation journey. And they're 3 rounds of champions in. And I love even the premise of updating the social contract with champions, because as the needs evolve and change, not assuming that people still want to give of their time. I mean, there's so many incredible nuances to human change management there. I mean, I'd be really eager to hear if our listeners have questions or areas that they want to probe on. It just felt like that is a conversation that it could easily become a 5-part series, on org transformation and change management. And yeah,
Or even like, I mean, like when you see the Moderna video that kind of made the rounds like a year ago, where he talks about like the 700 custom GPTs they've done, and they have their head of legal kind of like talking about how they use it. I think we were all kind of like envious in a positive way of like, how the hell have you managed to do that?
hmm,
And so the initial kind of thought is like, well, like now in all the organizations that I'm involved in, I want 700 GPTs, right? But his whole point is that is not what you need to start with. It's
yeah,
not about getting 700 GPTs in there. That is understanding of what is it that you can drive for people that will make them feel successful, and how do you use AI to do that? And so it's a kind of like a subtle but profound kind of change in how you approach it.
yeah. Why not how? Why not how? Tons more. I would say to our listeners, we love hearing from you. What stood out to you? Drop us a line on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever your preferred means of communication are. Let us know what you thought of this conversation. And if you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend, someone perhaps who's trying to catalyze a change in their own life or organization. And as always, let us know if you know of folks who you'd like to hear us talk to on the podcast.
And with that, so long.
Let's keep moving beyond the prompt.